welcome back to another Encore Excursion. My name is Lindsay and I work with Harris County Precinct for Encore. And today we're going to be learning a little bit more at the Texas Wendish Museum. Today I have Miss Marianne with us and she's going to teach us a little bit about the history of the Wendish people.
The Texas Wendish Museum opened in 1979, In 1979, it started with one building and we had 200 members at that time. But it actually originated in 1971 when five ladies decided that they wanted to have a booth at the Folklife Festival in San Antonio. They were denied and not allowed to have the booth unless they represented an organized society. So, well, what do? You make your own society. And those five ladies established the Wendish Culture Club. They wanted to do this so they could sell noodles at the Folklife Festival and they could tell the story of the Wendish immigrants coming to Texas. In 1979, when there were 200 members, it has grown since then. This building was dedicated in 1988, and we now have over 1,000 members all over the world. Texas, all the states of the United States, and in several countries in Europe and in Africa also. We are in the interpretive center of the Wendish Museum. The story of the winds begins in this scene, and the story is told on these panels as we go around the museum. The Wendish immigrants decided to immigrate to Texas after things were getting rough in Germany. The Wends are a Slavic group. They are from the eastern part of Germany near the Czech and the Polish border. And because they were a Slavic group, they were suppressed economically, socially, and religiously. And when the King of Prussia decided that he wanted all the churches to either be Catholic or Protestant, that these Lutherans said, no, we want to stay true to our Lutheran faith. So they called a pastor, Jan Killian, and Jan Killian got together 600 of these people, and they decided to immigrate to Texas. Each family was allowed one trunk, and this particular trunk, it's a shipping trunk. Each family was allowed one trunk where they could put all their belongings, like Bibles, kitchen utensils, clothing, anything they wouldn't use on the trip. This particular trunk belonged to my great-great-grandfather, George Casper. It probably, before it became a shipping trunk, was a wedding trunk, because you kind of see the flowers on there. But then when they decided to go to Texas, then they changed it to a shipping trunk, and they wrote on here, George Casper aus Kolpen nach Hamburg und Galveston. George Casper from Kolpen, Germany, to Hamburg, and then to Galveston. So this is my favorite piece in the whole museum. But anyway, when they got to Texas in 1854, it was December the 16th, and they were eager to build homes, but it was cold, and so they spent Christmas in Houston. And some of the people actually stayed in Houston because they were not real rich, and some of them had to just stay and get jobs, make a little bit of money. Others came a little bit further in to industry, New Ulm, and stayed with family members that had immigrated the year before. And the rest of them came to Central Texas, right here where we are, where two men had bought 4,000 acres of land, and they divided it into parcels, and as people were able, they bought their parcel of land. And in the center of that 4,000 acres, 95 acres, they set aside for the church. And this is where we are today, on these 95 acres right here. Okay. The Wendish people were from the eastern area of Germany, near the Czech border and the Polish border, and they were a Slavic people. They spoke a language that the Czech people and the Polish people could understand. Even today, Sorbish is spoken in Germany, and Sorbish is the same thing as Wendish. We're called Wends in the United States, but in Germany they're called Sorbs. And in that area, the street signs are bilingual. They have them in German and in Sorbish. And Sorbish is getting a resurgence, and they're teaching it in the schools as an elective. So things are looking up for the Sorbish people there. When the Sorbs came, they mostly were from these two churches, from Weigersdorf and Clinton churches. That's Pastor Killian was the pastor of those two churches at the time. And but when they came, it was very difficult for them because they had to change their whole way of life. They were used to growing flax but then they had to change to cotton for a cash crop. They were used to growing wheat for food, and they had to change to corn. Those things were different for them here in Texas. Our displays here show a couple of different things. One of the things that was common when they first came is that the brides wore a black wedding dress. This supposedly was a sign of the hardships that were to come in their married life. So they were realistic, I guess. Religion was one of the main reasons that the Wends came to Texas. In 1841, the King of Prussia kind of relaxed his requirement that they either be Catholic or Protestant, and he allowed certain churches, if they felt real strongly, to establish their own church and make an independent congregation. And so these Lutherans decided to do that. And in 1845, they built their own church, and they called Pastor Killian to be their pastor. And even though religion was a little bit more tolerated, they still had had restrictions on them, and they had to live in certain areas, and their language was suppressed. They were looked down upon for speaking Sorbish or Wendish, and so they decided to immigrate to Texas. The first group of Texans came in 1849. Well, just one family. And then in 1853, 30 people came to Texas. And after they settled here in Texas, they wrote such glowing letters back to Germany and said, "Come to Texas. It's a paradise. It's a wonderful place. Lots of land, free democracy, and it's a place you should come." And so Pastor Killian, who had first thought that they would go to Australia, changed his mind, and they decided to come to Texas instead. And they came on the Ben Nevis, which is a picture here of the Ben Nevis. But there were other causes also for their immigration, the economic and social discrimination that they suffered. So those were hard times, and those were reasons that they decided to come to the United States. They tried to keep their language for as long as they could, but because they were Americans, they wanted to become Americans, and the language of the homeland was English. So they learned English as much as they could. And because of that, they lost their Wendish language. Unfortunately, today, no one speaks Wendish except for little words here and there. But shortly after the Wends got to Texas, they had a hard time with making a living. But shortly thereafter, the Civil War started. And actually that helped the Wends economically because they could send their cotton to Mexico and get a pretty good price on it before it was shipped to Europe. But Wendish men were expected to join the Confederate Army, and the Wends were not slave owners, and farming was their job, they felt like, and not being in the military service. But they were loyal to the government, and they did, if they had to, they did serve in the Civil War. Stories are told of the men dressing in women's clothes and working in the fields so that they would not have to, when the men came to get the soldiers, they would pass over them thinking that they were women. Um, the Throughout this time, the Wendish settlement grew, and of course, with the birth rate and people immigrating in, the Serbian this area was no longer able to maintain all of these people, and so they went and established other areas in the near in Lee County and beyond. This is an example of some of the things that the Wendish women did. They enjoyed tatting and crocheting, making things, baptismal caps, because within 2 weeks of being born, the baby would be baptized in the church. This is a confirmation dress of Pastor Killian's daughter. And so those were things that were very important to the Wendish ladies and the Wendish people. This is a doodle sock. This man is dressed in traditional Wendish costume, playing the doodle sock. Nobody plays the doodle sock here, but in Germany they do. It's sort of like a bagpipe, and it's played at weddings and festivals there. Music is also very important. They enjoyed getting together at weddings and in other celebrations, or just on a Sunday afternoon, and playing accordion and singing songs. And there are many pictures up here that show how the winds would get together and sing songs and enjoy life that way. Today, there are thousands of people who are of Wendish descent, and most of them are a lot of them are in Texas, but they're all over the United States also. They have blended into the American society. Some of them don't even know they have Wendish ancestors. And because of that, their customs have faded away. One of the customs that they used to do is Vogelhochzeit, or bird wedding, which was a celebration mainly for little children in January, when they would celebrate the birds' wedding. And they would put out birdseed for the birds on the windowsill, and then the next day, the birds would leave candy and cookies for the children. And of course, this was very delightful. And today, we've tried to bring that custom back. And each year on January 25th, the director of the society will go to the school, the Lutheran school here, and the children will put out birdseed, and they're taught then about bird wedding and about their heritage. Today, all levels of people are in Texas society. We have a safe here that belonged to a druggist, and so there are doctors, druggists, teachers, all walks of life in the Wendish people. But Wendish means different things to different people, but they all share in their conviction that their forefathers came to enjoy the blessing of the freedom of religion. And so, even though they can't speak Wendish, and most of them can't speak German even, they still know that they are Wendish by heritage, and that is the heritage is a devotion to their faith. The Wends enjoyed decorating Easter eggs. That's one of the traditions in that part of Germany and in that part of Europe. The Wends each have their own unique way of decorating eggs. There are several ways. One of the ways is called the scratch method, where the egg is dyed and then the design is scratched into the egg. Another way is the wax, and they dip a goose feather or chicken feather into wax and paint the design onto the eggs. There's also the acid technique, which is dipping a pin into acid and then making the design on the egg, on the colored egg. So there are different ways, and we have these particular eggs are from Germany. They were the Bautzen, the museum, the Wendish Museum in Bautzen has a contest every year, and they see who can decorate the eggs the prettiest. And these are the winning eggs from 2011, and sent them to us to have on display because we're the only Wendish museum in the United States.
Okay, so here I have Mr. Jack with us today, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about their church that they currently still use, the third church that was built.
I will welcome you to Serban by saying Witachikanam, which is the Wendish word for welcome. The Winds arrived in Texas in 1854, and by March of 1855, they had bought the 4,000 acres that we are now standing on. The church is built right in the middle of those 4,000 acres. The first church is a log cabin church, which we have still to the south of this building. The second church was a wooden frame just to the north of this building. And in 1866, they decided to build the stone church that we're now in. There were Germans here and there were Winds here. They spoke two different languages. The Wendish language is akin to Czech and Polish, and of course German is German. And there was a German congregation and a Wendish congregation, and together they both decided to build this building. While they were doing that, they got in a quarrel amongst themselves, mainly over language and the way they should sing the songs, the hymns on Sundays. What they finally decided to do was separate themselves. So the Germans went to the north side of the cemetery where the museum now stands and built St. Peter's Lutheran Church. And the Wendish people were left here then to complete this building. It's made from red sandstone. There are some big red sandstone hills about 3 miles from here, and that's where they quarried the rocks for this building. This is a small rock. Some of the rocks in these walls are huge. Some are even smaller than this. But the walls are 2.5 feet thick and 24 feet high, so they're very heavy. Eventually, they cracked. And in the year 2010, we hired someone an engineering firm to tell us how we can fix this, because we knew we couldn't just take this church away and build a new one. That was just out of the question. So then they dug all under these walls, and huge concrete and steel beams were placed under these walls, because there's no bedrock here to hold up heavy walls like this. So anyway, it's a safe place to be now. It's not going to fall down on us while we're here. This church was built as a copy of the church they left in Germany to come. They first formed themselves into an immigration society, first thinking they would go to Australia, but then changed their mind and decided to come to Texas. Well, there were 600 of them that formed an immigration society, and before they left, they organized themselves into a Lutheran congregation and called a pastor to come with them to Texas. And so after the Civil War, they decided to build a stone church, and they decided to make it a copy of the churches that they left in Germany, approved by OSHA. They're steep. And older men in those days, the labor was very physical for men in those days. There were no machines to do their work, and there were no hip or knee replacements available in the 1800s. So some of the men said, we can't go up and down the stairs anymore, the older men. May we sit downstairs with the women? And the congregation said, no, you may not do that. So these older men said, well, we can't come to church anymore because we can't negotiate going up and down the stairs. Well, that wasn't a good idea either. So they came into a compromise. If the older men who felt they couldn't go up and down the stairs anymore could convince the congregation that they physically couldn't do it, they would be able to sit downstairs, but they would have to not set beside the women. That bench was given a Wendish name, a German name, and now it has an English name. We call it the waiting bench because those men who couldn't go up and down the stairs anymore were just waiting to go to heaven.
The congregation at Sermon loves to sing, and this is a good church to sing in because the walls are rock, the floor is rock, there's nothing to soak up the sound. So even 25 people can sound good in this building, but generally before the pandemic, we would have 350 people in church on Sunday. They crossed an ocean to be Lutherans in Texas, and coming to church and singing is still a very important part of their worship life. So I'll play for you Praise to the Lord the Almighty on this organ that was built in 1904.
I just want to thank you, Miss Mary Ann, for showing us around the museum today and teaching us a little bit more about the Wendish history.
Well, we thank you for coming and for making this available to a wider audience, and we hope that your viewers will enjoy watching these things and come to see us sometime.
I'm sure they will. And I just want to thank y'all again for joining us on another Encore excursion, and then we'll see you in our next one.